Hi, I'm Saida Garrett, co-writer of Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mr. Mark Tara.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the persons appearing on the program.
Today on Rainbow Country, TRAMPS, the new Canadian documentary about the art community of the new romantic scene that rose out of the 70s post-punk era in Britain. Award-winning Canadian filmmaker Kevin Hagee joins me to talk about TRAMPS. Plus, producer and musician Chris Burkett talks about working with the late, great Sinead O'Connor. That and more in episode 365, so stay tuned for Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hi, this is Carol Pope.
Hi, I'm Garrett Conley, author of Boy Erased, a memoir.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Segato.
Hi, I'm Gord Depp with the Spoons. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Well, hello and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I am your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT FM in Toronto and now proudly in syndication on 12 outlets across Canada, from coast to coast to coast. The Yukon, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the east coast of Canada in Newfoundland, Ontario, even down to Buffalo, New York, and online. Well, thanks to you tuning in, streaming, downloading, but ultimately listening. Together we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, a #1 LGBT podcast on Podomatic.com's Gay and Lesbian chart, as well as being recognized as Canada's #1 LGBT podcast on Feedspot.com. So today, rising from the ashes of the late 70s punk era, a fresh crowd of artists, musicians, and fashionistas would later be christened the New Romantics of East London, England. Writer, curator, producer, director, award-winning filmmaker Kevin Hagee joins me to talk about his latest documentary, TRAMPS, and a flashback to my 2020 interview with producer and musician Chris Burkett, who talks about working with the late, great Sinead O'Connor. Plus an hour 2 music from LGBT artists, independent artists, voices that we've come to know and love in classic disco, classic 80s, classic house, and on this episode I'm featuring some 80s dance, a spotlight on Chicago trans duo Opal Voss, and more. All that lies ahead as we start Journey 365 through Rainbow Country. And our first stop, the Rainbow Country Bookstore. Today, award-winning British author Adam Smith reads from his gay history book, Deep Sniff, A History of Poppers and Queer Futures, a book that reveals the long history of poppers. And by the way, the reading is accompanied by a parody song, Just a Quick Sniff of Poppers, from drag duo Cookie and Kashida.
When I was just a lad, I learned that anal sex was bad. The church said it was a dirty, rotten sin. But then I learned from other guys that no matter what the size, there's a simple trick to help you take that dick.
Just a quick snip of
poppers helps the penis slide right in. The penis slides right in. You can take it with a grin. Just a quick sniff of poppers helps the penis slide right in the most delightful way.
In the winter of 1866, actually, while a medical student in Edinburgh Royal Infirmary, Brunton met a patient called William H. This young man was only 26, but already had trained as a blacksmith and then switched to toll keeper. His first job may have required too much exertion for him to continue because Brunton's notes reveal that William suffered from heart trouble. When Brunton met him, William had recently been hit by a dull, heavy pain about the left nipple every 3 days or so, lasting for at least half an hour. The pain had come on after years of infrequent attacks ever since he'd suffered from rheumatism as a child. After a 3-week hospital stay earlier in the spring, William was back just before Christmas. Doctors gave him aconite, which slows the heart rate, and digitalis. When neither worked, Brunton gave him brandy. The strong stuff didn't help either, so there was only one thing for it. The experiment was not a stab in the dark. Brunton acted in a way that was consistent with his wishes to take basic research from the lab to the bedside, and only with a decent understanding of the actual effect in the body. He had read the work of another scientist, Richardson, that amyl nitrite dilated blood vessels, and had even discussed the effect with his colleague in Edinburgh, Arthur Gamgee, who had made some unpublished measurements of this effect. Brunton obtained some amyl nitrite from Gamgee, who made it for him, and consent for an experiment from his supervising physician. And this is how Brunton came to give his patient William amyl nitrite. On March the 12th, 1867, Brunton observed, "The pain came on as usual at 3 a.m. A few drops of nitrite of amyl were put on a towel and inhaled by the patient. The primary effect noticed was a suffusion of the face, and the patient felt a glow over his face and chest. The pain disappeared almost simultaneously with the occurrence of these phenomena, but returned in 3 minutes. He then inhaled 5 drops more. The pain again disappeared and did not return."
I met this guy once in a bar who took me outside to his car. He spread my cheeks and tried to ram it in. I screamed, "No, it's too big!" He said, "Take it all, you pig!" Then he shoved this small brown bottle up my nose. And girl, I gotta tell you something. That quick sniff of poppers helps the penis slide right in. The penis slide right in. Now I can take it with a grin. Just a quick sniff of poppers helps the penis slide right in the most delightful way.
Good queer performers push their audiences forward into the future they desire. A good performance is utopia for a moment. In the Royal Vauxhall Tavern, all of these potential utopias were whirled away when the police stormed in. Performances interrupted, orgasms foregone, connections broken. The police brought their alternative performance. The police did not just want to stop what was happening, they wanted to make their own utopia for a moment. They pulled on their costumes and they put themselves to work on embodying authority, power, intimidation. As individual officers, people with homes and hobbies, they had been moved by some newspaper stories about a deadly sex craze and by others that spoke of a horrible illness killing men who had sex with each other. They heard the words of politicians who spoke about preserving families and protecting children. As individuals, they may even have wanted no more gay or queer people. As an organized group of individuals, each wanting to belong to something bigger than they were, police officers were grabbed by the idea of cutting the number of queer venues. All we have is the records of their group performance, the way they stopped gay and queer people. They arrested our futures, at least for a night or two. The story of these raids is a story from the past, but it is about how we live in the present, creating a future. In every moment we are performing, making choices about the future we want to build for ourselves and others. We can be inspired by other people who are better than us at articulating a future, but it is not some distant, formless thing. How we are living now is always creating a future, whether we like it or not. Whether or not we are trying, we are performing a future. As a genderqueer dancer stretches the limbs they have, they bring us into their utopia for a moment.
Wow, this stuff is amazing! Yeah, let me try some. I've never done it before. Wow, this is hot. Shit. Hey, Cookie, let's put something in my ass and see if it works. I just dropped the whole thing on the carpet. Here, bend over. Let me try this chair. Oh my god, I can't even feel anything. Shit, the whole thing's thin. Wow, the room is spinning right now. These are great, but you know what? You can't use them if you're taking Viagra.
Why?
Well, because you'll die.
Oh, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Wow, this stuff is amazing. So this goes out to all the guys who are too concerned with size. It really doesn't matter anymore. As you watch his manhood grow, shove that bottle up your nose. Relax, Relax
your hole,
and
slide down on that pole.
Just a quick snip of the top, the penis slide right in. The penis slide right in. You can take it with a grin. Just a quick snip of the top, the penis slide right in.
In the most delightful,
Making it not frightful.
in the most delightful way.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Amanda Marshall, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Up next, a flashback to my 2020 interview with musician and producer Chris Burkett, who talks about his time working with the late, great Sinead O'Connor.
I'm dancing with 7 bells, wanting to pick up my star. See how the black moon fades, soon I can give you my heart.
So, Chris Burkett, 1990. At the time, 7 million copies sold worldwide, 6 weeks on the Billboard album chart, #1 in 16 countries. In 2012, the album was ranked 408 on Rolling Stone magazine's list of the 500 greatest albums of all times. The album I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got, the artist Sinead O'Connor, Chris Burkett, you co-produced and engineered this Grammy-winning album. How did that project come to you? Let's start there.
Yeah, okay. Well, I was in-house producer for a record company called Ensign Records, who are affiliated with Chrysalis Records, Ensign Chrysalis. The chap I was working with was Nigel Grange. So at that time, I was in-house producer and engineer at Tapestry Studios in London. And Nigel came down to me once and he said, I just signed this great artist from Ireland. Her name's Sinead O'Connor, a young girl. She's only like 19 or something. And I'd like you to mix a couple of tracks off her album. And it was The Lion and the Cobra, her first album, which didn't do all that. It was got respect, but it wasn't a huge selling record. So Sinead really liked what I mixed Mandinka and put them on me.
So you mix those two of her.
Yeah, I did Mandinka and Put It On Me, and then Sinead wanted to work with me on her next album, and I'd already had a good relationship with her and Faulkner O'Kaley, who's her manager at the time. And I remember sitting in the car outside the studio once, and Faulkner played me "Nothing Compares to You," the Prince version. And he said, "Sinead wants to do a song, And I said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I think we need to, I didn't really think it was a great song, not Prince's version. Excuse me, Prince, but it didn't really go anywhere. So I said to Faulkner, well, I think we should just rearrange it a little bit, So, we chopped things around and made it much more, arrangement is everything. I mean, you can get the most mundane melody and it's what you put around it, which actually makes it come to life, so it's very important.
Right.
So it's the same with Nothing Compares to You. I mean, we just hit on a really good arrangement for it. And then it was released, and we did the album as well. And it went up to 42 in the charts in Britain, and then the BBC dropped it. They didn't think it was going to be a hit, so they dropped it. And so we thought, oh, that's the end of that, And then they made a video. Sinead was crying on it in the Montmartre Cemetery and stuff, And that video broke the song. So it's kind of a good example of you don't really know what's a hit and what isn't. I mean, you could have the best song in the world, but it doesn't hit into the right cogs, in the universe, So it doesn't,
That record, Nothing Compares to You, was originally released. Nothing really happened.
No, it went into the charts, but it only got to 42
right.
in the UK
and then
charts.
the video came out, that's what changed.
It skyrocketed. As soon as people saw the video, for some reason, everybody started to want to play it, and then it became a number one in every country.
Around the world.
So I don't know who directed the video because I wasn't involved in that, but whoever it was really responsible for that record to being such a huge success.
Whose choice was it to have no bass line in that song?
Oh, it was mine. I didn't think it needed a bass line. And it's one of the only records that I've done where I haven't used bass, because actually bass is, for me, bass, the final frontier. It's it's one of the best instruments on records. But it just had a really good groove.
Yeah,
it was just a really simple kick and snare sample, but with a real hi-hat on it, which made it come to life. And some nice, there's a guy called Goto, who's a Japanese guy, did program the strings on it. So it wasn't real strings, although they sound real. And it didn't seem the strings were giving it enough bottom and the kick drum, so it didn't seem to need a bass. So didn't do it.
Did you ever hear from Prince in regards to when that song really took off? Did you ever hear anything from him in regards to the song?
No, because, that song started to, go off everywhere, and then Sinead was touring everywhere, and I lost contact with her, and I was on to other things. I was just I'm constantly creating and making music. So I was in the studio. Some of the times I didn't even know what was happening to the records I'd made, I didn't even know they were hits,
Did the success of that album, did that surprise you?
Well, the album was really successful because of the single. It's one of those examples where they picked the right single, and that actually launched the album.
Nothing compares. Nothing compares to you. Nothing compares. Nothing compares to you.
Hi, everybody. This is Gino Vanelli. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Up next, Tramps.
I'm never going to fit in, so what's the point?
There's a feeling of something new happening, rejecting the old. I mean, it's a duty of every generation to reject the old.
This is what I want to look like. Kiss my ass.
It was like a celebration of life that ignored the misery that was going on.
The level of education we had was the lowest you can get.
My parents were obsessed about you getting a career, so I was like, fuck you, and legged it to London.
It was quite anarchic, and there was loads of drugs.
When you're living in a fucking drain, the best thing you can look forward to do is like getting out the drain and dressing up and gorge.
Even if you're poor, you can look fabulous.
There could be somebody head-to-toe in fetish rubber sat with Elizabeth I.
It wasn't recognised for the kind of transgressive thing that it was. There was a kind of cultural divide.
And because people didn't have much money, it was very much a sort of self-made image.
I think a lot of people expected to be big stars, you know, but never quite got there.
And I look back at that time and realise how really fearless I was.
If it was really too much, they'd come up and punch you in the face.
Yes, the narrative of dressing up and showing off. How wonderful. What a life.
Kevin Hagee, hi, how are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Am I saying your last name correctly, Hagee?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, good. Score
that's
one for...
says it. Like, I think that we've bastardized it, you know, Canadianized it over the generations, but we'll go with that.
I have to say thank you for being here, to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond. So thank you for that, especially to talk about your new full-length documentary, Tramps. In June, Gay Pride Month, your documentary Tramps had some Pride screenings, correct?
Yeah, it was programmed at the Hot Docs Theater as part of their Pride programming, and it was also the theatrical premiere of the film.
And how did those go?
It played just the once, and it was really fantastic. I don't think it was sold out, but it was very packed. We had Jeffrey Hinton, who's one of the stars of the film, come and join us for the talk and to DJ after at the party. And my good friend Kat Duma, who is an amazing artist, producer, and musician from Toronto. She played a DJ set, and Hercules and the Love Affair showed up and did a little surprise number. So it was super festive.
So, dykes, queers, punks, prostitutes, tramps. This is your full-length documentary, I believe your second film. So let's start here. How would you describe what this documentary is about?
Well, I like to think of it as a sort of, you know, even though it takes place in the early 80s in London, for me, it's sort of an allegory for artists that are trying to find ways to make work in increasingly capitalist, you know, social, political scenarios, eras. And those just seem to shift over the decades rather than get better. So it's basically about trying to reposition the New Romantic movement, which is a pop cultural movement that people would know from bands like Boy George and Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran in the early 80s, because they were dominating the airwaves. But it's sort of trying to reposition that as an art movement rather than a solely pop cultural one, because a lot of amazing art making and cross-pollination between different art mediums happened leading up to that culminated in the New Romantics thing being a household name. So just tries to diversify the people who are contributing to the subculture at that time.
So talk to me about how this documentary came about, because you're telling something that's specifically for the New Romantic movement at that time, as opposed to, say, like New Wave that was also happening at the same time. So how did this particular idea come about?
Well, I had a bit of a fascination, not a fascination, but I've been drawn to a lot of British subcultural stuff, like spanning the decades all my life. I think starting with having older sisters and listening to the aforementioned bands, while I was growing up. And then as I got older and got deeper into music and film and stuff like that, just starting to realize some of the nuances behind all of those movements. And I was a big fan of a movie called Hail the New Puritan by an artist called Charles Atlas, which it's a mockumentary about a day in the life of Michael Clark, who's a choreographer, who basically gave up this career in the National Ballet or whatever, to do his own thing and basically make a kind of punk version of ballet, and remained a national treasure. So I was a big fan of Michael Clark's, and he used costumes and from Lee Bowery and Lee Bowery in his work, who's a, quasi-famous performance artist, proto-drag artist from the UK, who died of AIDS.
In 94, I believe.
Yeah, in 1994. And then there's, if you just look closer at that film, there are so many incredible people just as background characters or feature in certain scenes, like the dancer Les Child, who's in Tramps, and the Neo-Naturists, and there's some body map in there, the clothes. So that became like a root for a lot of interests of mine.
But was there a flashpoint, a moment that sparked this to say, I'm going to make this movie about the New Romantic movement in the UK from the early 80s? Was there a flashpoint for that?
Yeah, I suppose it was when in 2013 I was in London for the first time, and I met Jeffrey Hinton, who was the sort of resident DJ at Lee Bowery's Taboo Club, and among many other things. But I met him and basically just started to realize how tangible all of these intergenerational sort of histories were in London. People are around. Boy George is around. Princess Julia is around. And
Marilyn's still around.
Marilyn's still around. She wasn't really responding to me at the time. I think she was just coming out of hibernation, let's say, heroin hibernation. And so we never really connected. But yeah, everyone's around. And I found it really inspiring how older artists, still had the energy to sort of be out and about and connecting with younger artists, and just inspired by my meeting with Jeffrey and my love of London in general. I knew I wanted to go back there and make a movie, and most of Jeffrey and I's conversations revolved around this place, the Warren Street Squat, which is just notable because a lot of recognizable names lived there at some point or hung out there at some point or the other. And so it gets a lot of attention as far as squats go. And the genesis of the idea, I think, was to zoom in on the Warren Street Squat in particular. But then my research just got to the point that the idea just became way bigger. But yeah, I guess it was that time when I was in London with my first movie, just meeting so many incredible people.
Had you reached out to Boy George you just mentioned, I think you maybe tried to reach out, or you reached out to Marilyn.
I mean, there's anybody alive. I reached out to like hundreds of people for sure. And we interviewed people who don't end up in the movie. It just, trying to narrow down a story to, we already have a lot of people in there, but just getting the best, strongest story, you don't get to fit everyone in there. And there are so many avenues, a movie like this could take. And we just sort of took one of them. But Boy George, we've never actually, I interviewed him myself for a Toronto publication. And we met backstage at a Culture Club show. And he was amazing. But just his schedule, and he had other commitments to some stuff that he's working on, and contractually couldn't come on to this film. I mean, I really would have loved to have George on, because I think it would have been interesting to position him as a member of a peer group instead of being the central focus. Because when I think of Boy George, and I really think of him as being included in a community rather than being like the king of that community, or so that's an opportunity.
Or the queen.
Yeah, or the queen that I wish that I had. But his manager was very kind and said they support the film and all that stuff. So I don't know if he's seen it. I have no idea if Boy George has seen this movie or not. Although everyone, like Body Map, still work with him, and some other people do too. So I can't imagine. I don't know. I guess you never asked if he's seen it, but I do wonder.
Tramps features a lot of archival footage.
Right, yeah.
From different artists and performances and experiences, and well done to that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we had a lot of archival support. Like the Neo-Naturists had just done sort of retrospective show at a place called Studio Voltaire. So thankfully they had all of their video in one place. And John Mabry, who's a pretty notable queer filmmaker from the UK, he kind of gave us free reign to use his films, and he'd done a lot of like experimental short films that I was familiar with already. And we ended up working with a guy at the BFI, an archival guy there, who basically just through reading and talking to people and coming across names of really obscure stuff, we were able to dig up a lot of obscure stuff one way or the other. And then on the other hand, get support from Derek Jarman's estate, or whatever, the handlers of his work, to use Derek Jarman's work in the film, which was really elevated things, because he's kind of like the godfather of so many queer things. So that was really crazy. Yeah, the scope of just unknown home video type joke movies all the way through big budget queer epic films. There was a lot. It was amazing. That was sort of the greatest thing, to have access to this wealth of images that we could never cram into the movie, but it is pretty jam-packed.
Do you have a favorite artist or band or even song from that era?
From that era, I mean, we purposely didn't use any music from the era because we wanted to have the music sort of give more contemporary context to the film, do something a bit more futuristic and not be too nostalgic. But my own from that whole era, I guess, no. I don't know. There was so much going on. I made compilations of lots of music from that era, but I love like Wire. I mean, they're a post-punk band that came out of that time, and Matthew Sims, who plays on the soundtrack to this, actually plays in Wire now. He's one of the younger members, but I mean, I listened to the fun thing about it was discovering the beauty in things like bands that I didn't like Sex Pistols, I thought were overrated and no one wanted to talk about that again. But hearing people's personal stories of how, you know, hearing them say no future and stuff like that really spoke to them as like young, hopeless, aimless kids, it was really an emotional and sincere relationship that band had with their fans. And it was a very small community too. So it kind of reinvigorated my interest in those records actually a lot. But I guess, in the punk era, I love the Damned and Susie Sue. I never was super big on any of the like major bands that came out of that time period, like
so Duran Duran and Culture Club and
I love Culture Club. I love Church of the Poison Mind. I love Alta Moria. I love the Culture Club. Yeah, for sure. But Duran Duran and everything, it was more, they were so big, I never went really deep with them. I feel like people a bit older than me, like my sisters and stuff, they were full blown obsessed. But my sort of my own relationship to the bands, at least they're featured in the images of the movie, would be like Susie Sue or the Damned, and Gary Newman later.
For yourself,
Soft Cell, I love Soft Cell. I really wanted Mark Allman to be in the movie. That didn't work out.
Did you reach out to him?
I think so. I must have. Literally, I don't think anybody who's walking or breathing.
Who's walking?
I don't think anyone who's breathing or assist or not. I reached out to pretty much anyone. Everyone. And that was really weird, like through Facebook or MySpace or this, that. But also my focus was more on like art makers and like
rather than like say musicians.
Yeah, like it wasn't, not to say the music isn't art, but wasn't really looking to like confirm or readdress things that we already know of that scene, like the aforementioned bands. And for me, it was really zooming in on the makers of clothes, of films, of paintings, of.
You weren't looking to make another music documentary on the new romantic scene.
Yeah, it was like, for me, the interest really started with the people in the movie, and then this very specific time in the early 80s where people could go to school for free, live in a squat for free and have this bounty, of time, to be able to experiment and create and everything. It all kind of started around that. And it just so happens that because of all these elements, the new romantic sort of tagline was the thing that was the kind of catch-all. So it wasn't even really my intention to actually make a movie about the new romantics. It just kind of became a sort of convenient package for things. And a lot of the people who were contributing to that scene probably wouldn't even have felt part of it. It was something like most notable music or art movements. The tagline, the name, like punk or new romantic, is something that's given, to them later by some of the press, and it's always really contentious talking about that with people because they think it's a load of crap. But so the new romantic thing was just kind of more of an umbrella to help describe, the social environment that these people were engaged with. So yeah, no, it wasn't my intention to make like a new romantics music documentary. There's plenty, there's so many of those, and there continue to be. So, and I think that's great. But as like an independent filmmaker, it doesn't make sense for me to try and contribute to that particular narrative.
You're telling the independent side of things.
Yeah, I think so. There's a DIY sort of.
Yeah.
I mean, that whole era was so incredibly DIY.
That I was just going to say that whole era
Yeah,
was
like
and is DIY. Do it yourself, damn it.
Yeah, it was still very punk. I mean, it was just punk with like really big hair and like, clothes from, costume stores that were going out of business. And it was all just by fluke, but a lot of stuff was made by paper mache and people were still making things out of plastic bags. But, instead of them being just a ripped up plastic bag, it would just be more of a gown, so it was just sort of a reaction to a reaction to a reaction. And, again, coming, basically out of squalor. So,
I want to ask you in regards to Tramps, and after seeing Tramps, Lee Bowery and his art, his performances, passed away in 1994. But the original musical Taboo, with lyrics by Boy George, I didn't realize that there was a connection between his art and that musical. And I haven't seen the musical, but I didn't realize that until after seeing this documentary, because I was like, that artist, Lee Bowery, his certain looks seem familiar to me. And I'm like, wait, that musical from 2002, and I think one of the most recent runs was in 2012, with his how he would do his makeup with it looks like paint running down your head sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think Boy George had that exact look when he was out promoting this musical.
Well, he was playing Lee Bowery in that musical.
Was he? Okay.
Yeah. So like Philip Salon is in that musical. A lot of the people being performed as characters in that musical are in this film, and were part of that production. Boy George and Lee Bowery were friends, and Lee Bowery made a bunch of clothes for him. And so, I mean, the impact that Lee Bowery had on that community was enormous. And so that's funny because, I mean, Taboo is essentially a musical about, the life and times of Lee Bowery and his club, which was called Taboo, which is just like a really no holds barred kind of crazy club. And so they used all of his clothes, and Boy George just kind of like embodied Lee Bowery. I think that maybe to some people's, objection or something, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I remember at the time, being much younger and being a huge discovering Lee Bowery. He wasn't as well known as he is now. And Charles Atlas's documentary about Lee Bowery, hadn't been released widely or anything. So you really had to be kind of like an art fag or like you had to be a certain type of person to know Lee's work at that time. But now it just permeates so much of our culture, especially with drag culture being so accessible. I mean, all the young, interesting drag queens that you see on TV, at least, for me, have a clear, have been impacted by Lee Bowery's looks, and
whether they probably know it or not.
Yeah, I think that you either know or you don't know when it comes to Lee Bowery. But I know I do have that DVD of the Taboo musical. I really wish I could have seen it. It looks chaotic and amazing. But yeah, Boy George definitely had a period while that was happening where he was just basically performing Lee's looks, which is kind of incredible, I guess, in retrospect.
Tramps, the title. Is there a story behind that specific title?
There is a story behind the title. When I did those preliminary interviews, when I was there to doing research, Scarlett Cannon told us this amazing story about how you basically would do your makeup in your squat, but you had no running water, so you'd have to go to these public baths. At the time, they had public, shower and hot bath places where you paid a quarter or whatever, and then you had access to hot water, or you'd have a bath. And then you'd put your makeup on after the bath and go back to the squat. And basically, she said it was just us and the tramps. So like the New Romantic kids, the Blitz kids, and homeless people, essentially. So I just called it Us and the Tramps for a while. It was also called I'm Not Dead, because I kept on saying to people like, oh, in your time. And Jeffrey Hinton said, well, I'm not dead. Still my time. But I ended up just calling it Tramps as a kind of a placeholder. And then it just became really familiar to me. And it was sort of a personal joke about how, the double entendre of the word. Me as a Canadian filmmaker, tramps in North America means sort of has a sleazy connotation. And then obviously a play on sort of living in squalor, and the way that in Britain that would mean like a lesser housed community or something. So I just thought it was kind of a funny double-edged title. But a lot of people in the movie were like, I'm not going to be in a film called Tramps, because they like fancy themselves to be really like extravagant or whatever. But that's sort of the joke. It was sort of a joke about the North America versus UK sort of connection. Yeah, I'm sort of the only, in terms of production, the only Canadian thing about it. So and also just thought it sounded sexy and fun and silly and suggestive. And so basically it's a story about the New Romantics taking baths in the same places as people who were living on the streets and everything.
So Tramps is your second film. You won the Best Canadian Film at the 2012 Inside Out LGBT Film Festival for your first documentary, She Said Boom, about the Toronto girl punk band Fifth Column. Here's my last question for you, award-winning filmmaker Kevin.
Thank you.
What do you hope audiences come away with after they've seen Tramps?
Well, it was sort of how I was describing before about it being, I really wanted audiences to connect on an emotional level, and I really needed some inspiration, some creative inspiration on what the point is making art when it's so hard to do that. It's very hard to make art in Canada. The funding is treacherous. And there's lots of ups and downs with that. And it can really be sort of soul crushing. And so I think the main takeaway for me is just the idea of people, whether they're artists or not, finding some inspiration, some inspiration to continue, and that as hard as it is, it's important that we create beautiful things. And we don't have to answer why we want to make those things or why they're so important. So yeah, I just want people to be inspired and to build some community around that for anybody who needed to hear that, really. The tagline is the art of survival. And I really think that making art for most of the people in the film and many of the people that I know is just a means of survival, which is so ironic because it makes you want to die most of the time because it's so hard to pay the bills and everything. But just finding some sort of support there and some inspiration. And I really hope that people find that it mirrors a contemporary situation that they find themselves in. Maybe they find some inspiration from looks and artists that they didn't know existed before. And then they do their own research. And because there's such a wealth of amazing stuff out there, maybe just encouraging people to look closer at what's in the frame. Look at the pop star, but then look at whose clothes they're wearing, who's directing it. Look at how you can look to your friends to build something amazing, even if you have very few resources. I think that's for me the most exciting part of it.
And this will be available on VOD in August, correct?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe that we're aiming to have it streaming across Canada at least. In August, and then the rest of the world-ish soon after that.
Well done. Well done. Award-winning filmmaker Kevin Hagee, thank you so much for your time. Well said, well done, well filmed, well made. Excellent Canadian documentary. Yay.
Yeah, it's so great. It's so great to be able to talk about it now that it's done, and I'm so grateful for you taking the time to look at it and talk to me, and just share it with your audience. And it, like I said, it's such a British movie, so I was a bit concerned about how, to segue that into my home country and everything. So it's great hearing people's thoughts finally.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for your time.
I'm never going to fit in, so what's the point?
There's a feeling of something new happening, rejecting the old. I mean, it's a duty of every generation to reject the old.
This is what I want to look like. Kiss my ass.
It was like a celebration of life that ignored the misery that was going on.
The level of education we had was the lowest you can get.
My parents were obsessed about you getting a career, so I was like, fuck you. Legged it to London.
It was quite anarchic, and there was loads of drugs.
When you're living in a fucking drain, the best thing you can look forward to do is like getting out the drain and dressing up and gorge.
Even if you're poor, you can look fabulous.
There could be somebody head-to-toe in fetish rubber sat with Elizabeth I.
It wasn't recognised for the kind of transgressive thing that it was. There was a kind of cultural divide.
And because people didn't have much money, it was very much a sort of self-made image.
I think a lot of people expected to be big stars, but never quite got there.
And I look back at that time and realise how really fearless I was.
If it was really too much, they'd come up and punch you in the face.
Yes, the narrative of dressing up and showing off. How wonderful. What a life.
TRAMPS is scheduled to hit VOD and Apple TV in August. And for even more on award-winning filmmaker Kevin Hagee, check out the website, mixedbloodmedia.com.
Phone rings. I got a message from the mayor. He's going to call me back the next day. I get the call, and he said, if you'd accept, we'd like to honor you with the key to the city. It was an event later that year in May. Just a key, right? Like, key to what? A decent job, a good singing career. It's really a metaphor, but it's history. So a reporter wants to talk to me and says, so it's a key, right? Like, what's the big deal? I said, well, not everybody gets the key. So I looked it up, and I guess it is kind of a big deal.
The date, May 17th, 2018, when trans activist Susan Gapka made history by becoming the first trans woman to be presented with the key to the city of Toronto. By the way, past recipients include Rush and the Raptors. And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, simply head over to marktara.com where everything is connected and hit the archives banner. To keep up to date with the show, check out the socials at Mark Tara. The edited podcast version is available on all major platforms. And finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, despite all the craziness in the world these days, know this, that we are living in days of making dreams come true. So believe in yourself, and the world will believe in you.
Hi, this is Police Constable Danielle Botno, also known as LGBT Cop, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.